Great. So thank you very much for this opportunity to come and present this afternoon. Yeah, maybe just a little bit of background around who I am. So my name is Stephano. I've been a behavioral insights specialist now for the last 18 years, consulting or working in various capacities. More recently, I've worked for three companies that I'll talk about more in terms of the experience on today's topic. But most of it is really around challenging this topic of digital transformation in each of the roles that I've been in. And it's often been quite an interesting journey, given that the end user's always been a different type of end user, but there's always been the same kind of principles or application in terms of how I've approached it. So, yep. So the main point of actually where I wanted to start from is the yeah. So the main point that I really want to start from is that about a decade ago, it's actually a bit more than a decade, almost 15 years ago, there was this whole topic around digital transformation, what it actually meant, and how different companies at that time were like challenging themselves in terms of what did it mean to become more digital and adopt digital. And the common sentiment was, we needed an app. And that seemed to be the common thing that people were talking about. We need an app so we can make things more convenient, we can connect to our end users better, and we can solve their problems. Interestingly, and this has really didn't change over the years, and even in 2018, there was some papers around that actually said that a lot of the digital transformation in the market had really gone more from an application perspective as opposed to designing and developing radically new software technology. And if there was any new software technology, it was really incorporated into those applications that people were developing. But besides that, what actually started happening in addition to that is in my role, I was being challenged as well. And this was often the case of thinking about it slightly differently. And where it starts from is really that regardless of the setting or wherever it was that we look at, and I've used these four images almost to give you a perspective of what might have been a need of let's try and transform this world digitally. What did that really mean in these different contexts? And these are four examples or four contexts that have been actually digitally transformed. And how they've been transformed is really interesting, given that they haven't always been an application based. In some cases, there have been an application linked to this, but really what it has is it's taken this perspective of looking at the end user and really trying to understand the human behind using it as opposed to an outcome. And I think that's the difference in which I've often been faced with is that a lot of people have said, yeah, we want an app, as opposed to, okay, what is the real need behind what people are looking for? And I mean, most of you will be more familiar with this, is that you can't just be outcome-based. You've actually got to be a bit more human-based and human-centric in terms of how we are thinking about developing or designing something from a digital perspective. So with that in mind, I wanted to give you three use cases of where we were, or I was often challenged with something similar, and how that sort of took on in terms of different audiences and where that progressed towards. So from the first perspective, I thought I'd best start and talk about a direct-to-consumer view. And what that basically meant is I worked for a large financial service provider at the time, and this financial service provider really wanted to take on this challenge of helping people make better financial decisions or be healthy in their financial decisions. And those of you who are familiar with the South African context will be aware of these big financial companies that also want to offer you something from a health perspective. So this was no different to what you might be familiar with already. And given where the business was, they wanted to differentiate themselves. They wanted to take on a bigger challenge. And at that time, it was really incorporating a lot of behavioral economics into this digital challenge that they've had. And what they wanted to ultimately impact is create higher engagement and have something that was a lot more measurable in terms of people's financial wellness as well as health wellness. So what that basically, where that came from is that there was a lot of literature in the mainstream arenas at the time, which there still is. And it probably helped with two of these individuals getting a Nobel Prize during that time. But there was a lot of literature in the market around behavioral science, behavioral economics, and how to bring in a bit of behavioral design in your products and your solutions. And that was no different to the challenge we were presented with in the company. The difference, though, is that we realized that we couldn't just follow the behavioral trend at the time, but we had to also look a little bit deeper. And that's where we followed the science as well. And we decided to also look at the science. And what the science meant is that we need to understand emotions a lot better. And what that meant is we had to, if we were going to change behavior and decision making, we also had to look at the emotions that were behind decision making. That also, I mean, we could talk about that separately around the ethical challenges that can present, because, yeah, you could be manipulating individuals in that regard. But what ultimately we were really trying to do was stay on the ethical fronts, but also try to nudge people in the right direction that was beneficial for them, even though there was still benefit for the corporate. So what were the learnings, and what did we discover while working at this large, or what did I discover while working at this large financial service provider, was that the most important thing was to keep learning and keep experimenting and setting up these experiments. And a really good example that I can give you is that at the time, we set up three conditions and one or three experimental conditions and one control condition around just getting somebody to sign up to a program. And we thought we could use a lot of behavioral messaging. And there was one of the conditions was really to keep it simple. And the neutral condition was very neutral. It was just a basic email. What we actually discovered was the simpler, the better. And people actually didn't respond to the behavioral challenges. They actually responded mostly to keeping it simple. So again, really, as much as we thought we could actually drive behavior through these cool behavioral science experiments, we also realized that sometimes just the basic understanding of the human need behind it all was more important. And that was really keeping it simple and keeping it basic for people, because that actually created more of a sign up than trying to create a game out of it. The other part of that, one of the other key learnings out of that was how important it is to have a reciprocal relationship with the end user. And what that basically meant is that a lot of times where companies get it wrong, especially when they're developing digital solutions for the end user, is to keep it transactional. And that means that over time, people just stop using it, or they lose interest in using certain digital solutions. And why that is either they have to put in a lot more effort into these programs or into these offerings. And in addition to that, they just the reward starts or doesn't outweigh the effort, and the reward starts becoming or starts creating through various other theories that you can actually refer to, but it starts diminishing in value or perceived value. And with that, actually, what we found is that how can we, and this is the challenge that we presented ourselves with. I wouldn't say we got it right at the time, but the challenge that we had to keep going with was to create this human experience. So that meant that even though people knew that they were engaging with a corporate, how do we bring the human element behind that so people do not feel that they are always gaining back or they need to gain back more because they're already paying a service to the corporate? How do you create an experience that still feels human, where they feel that I'm willing to put in the effort, but still the effort is much lower than the amount of reward that they're getting. So it creates this experience that they still feel, okay, I can keep contributing more to it. So it's balancing up this reciprocal relationship. And that was quite an interesting challenge for us. I wouldn't say we got it perfect working there, but it was part of that experimentation. That was part of the challenge, to try and get that reciprocal relationship as optimal as possible. The most important part of this, and I would, and many of you who probably belong to these behavioral programs or these behavioral change programs in the South African context and maybe globally as well, will probably know that a lot of them are not very successful at dealing with this one big challenge, and that is emotional dissonance. So what they're very good at is telling you that you're overweight or over-indebted, but what they're not great at is actually making it feel human on the other side. And when you actually confront people with, yeah, you can actually say it for what it is, often that creates an emotional dissonance within the individual itself that is receiving the news. So people don't always want to hear that. They don't, it might be the truth, but it is within, it creates this feeling of defense. You build up people are building up walls. So you're really going into the space of like, I'm not interested. I don't want to go down this road. You can think of it in a sales pitch when somebody's calling you from a telesales perspective. Again, you are going in that space of like, I'm not interested. And that is immediately because people are crossing the boundaries of who you are as a human. And this was a big challenge in itself for us to try and get beyond. And like I said, the big challenge was to keep reminding the person that when they're engaging with that digital platform, there's still a human behind that. With that in mind, I think what is really important is how do you create a humanized experience in that digital environment? And I think where we're going in this day and age, especially with AI and how AIs learn to empathize a little bit more, what's happening is you are creating those conversations that are a bit more human based, but people still know that they're engaging with the machine. And that's the biggest challenge in this is how do we overcome those barriers where people still feel that this is a transactional relationship, this is a machine behind it. How do we create those environments that allows people to feel more engaged, but that they can actually feel that this is part of a community that they're in and not just I'm providing data and I'm getting back something in return. I'm not sure if there are any questions, but I maybe want to pause at this point and just check if there are any burning questions right now before I continue and share something or share some of my other two experiences.
Serena turned on the camera. That means she's going to ask a question.
Okay.
Well, I'm afraid my question is obvious. Yeah, so so there were, and I agree with the people saying in the chat that the dissonance is obvious. But I was wondering because we also see that in students actually. So and that we have to share information with them, and we're trying to share it also in a humanistic, very kind way, but they stop engaging once the information isn't so great. So I was actually going to ask, like, which ways you have to mitigate this, or examples of that was really useful, because we're not having the best of luck with AI either. Yeah,
and I mean it's actually quite interesting you bring that challenge up, and I mean we had a very similar experience, slightly different to one of these challenges, but I think the big challenge we had at the time was creating some education around one of the products that people were using. So even though it was a beneficial product for them, people often saw they often experienced quite a negative effect of that product because they were not really understanding what this product could do for them. And it's the same as you're providing information, people don't always understand the end result of it. It actually, I think it took us about 4 years to discover what was the best process for this. And ultimately behind that, what we realized was, again, there was a behavioral challenge. And the behavioral challenge is that people defaulted into a space where they wanted the least amount of effort into what they wanted. And how do you reduce that information in a way that it becomes the least amount of effort that people can consume? And that is a challenge in itself. I think what happened was that we had to take that decision away from some of the consumers, and we tried that, and we saw actually it worked quite well in those settings, that people benefited really well from, and I'll give this was really in the medical aid product. So even though they wanted a cheaper product, by opting for something a little bit more, they meaning the option of actually contributing towards a bit of a savings option in your medical aid would enable them to actually avoid having all these extra day-to-day expenses. what that basically meant was that people that didn't have those options were often digging into credit to actually access the doctors. And then it had this vicious cycle that they would get stressed and then had this cycle of they would need to claim more because they were stressed. And you had this reciprocal process and it just carried on, carried on, carried on. So how do you default somebody into that space? That was a really nice, easy one without having to give them a lot of information. You gave them less options to choose from in the beginning. And often it is the choices that people make in the beginning that actually helps them to realize, okay, well, this is the option that I'm choosing into. But you have a really good challenge because information feels complex, but maybe it's how you package the information in the beginning that and getting that across to students that actually helps them to feel like I've made a choice in this, but I'm choosing the path of least resistance. And I'm not sure if that might be one of the, and that's what we realized was the solution to this.
That was very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. I'm going to continue to the next one, and a different end user in this case was where we had a business-to-business relationship. So this came as I got to work with Derek and a little bit with Ted in this space, but this was for a tech startup where they still have hardware and software solutions. But what we were looking at specifically was to help professionals make sense of complex data, specifically eye tracking data that we were looking at. And the barrier to entry was that we had academics who were buying into the solution, but we struggled to connect to people where this would actually still be quite useful to them in ordinary day-to-day business, because often they would see this is quite complex. It's a lot of data. How do I interpret this? How do I make sense of this? And so our purpose was really to create a simple, engaging tool that was used, didn't lose the value of being scientific at the back end, but was really simple and easy for people to make sense of all this data, so that we could actually enable people to make better decision-making within their own businesses or whatever it is that they were trying to solve. So there was one specific solution or application that we were working on at the time. And the company did actually launch it. Again, it was quite interesting that there was a lot of people within the business that were like, yeah, but you can't take this to the market as it is. And we thought, okay, great. We want to go pilot this. We want to beta test this with the market. So what we did was we gave people free licenses in the beginning. And we quickly learned that by giving these free licenses, actually, there was no engagement. And I'm not joking, like no one actually engaged with it. Even though it was a free solution, you could go and use this. You were getting free data. You were getting to analyze your data, but people didn't take it up. But if we compare that beta testing phase to another one, and this was quite an interesting one, was how free is free. And again, we had another solution, which was a gaming solution, where we did a bit of beta testing, and there was great uptake, but great feedback that came from it. Because ultimately what the business was doing was we wanted the feedback. So that's why we gave the free solution. So we would say, yeah, you still have it, but what we would like in return was just some of your input. That wasn't ideal in that scenario, but what worked better was when it became a bit more social. And there was a bit of social currency associated to it. So in the gaming arena, there was a community of people who could try out this software solution that involved still eye tracking, but it was a new digital solution that they had developed, or the developers had built. And what we did within this gaming community was we said, okay, you have access to this for the next 3 weeks. We want you to try it out, but come back with feedback. Tell us what you think is working and what's not working. But where the feedback was happening was actually on this platform where, like gamers love Discord and so on, it was in a Discord platform. People could see each other. And then it really became about that these people were sharing their own learnings, and it created a bit of a social currency. And when I say social currency, it felt like people wanted to give way more. So people were trying a lot more to try and break the solution so that they could almost have the golden nugget of saying, oh, look what I found. It's almost like a bit of a Bitcoin mining sort of scenario. But that is one of the areas that we realized that, yes, it was a free solution that they could try out, but there was something more to it. So they were also giving back to the community while also gaining a bit of social status. One thing I know that doesn't always work in the long term, but it was a great way for us to do a lot more beta testing. It's creating these communities where people felt like, okay, I was engaging in something where I can see how others are learning from this, but I'm also part of this where I can contribute. Another learning we had is that often, sometimes people say speed up the process, so make it simple. And that's one of the challenges we had, is we really wanted to make sure that people didn't have to go through all these steps of analysis. It was more about keeping it simple and getting them to the end result as quickly as possible. What we learned very quickly is that maybe that's not always the case. And what we needed to do was actually slow it down and give them a bit of a step-by-step process around this. So really showing them what's under the hood. So yes, they get to see everything under the hood, but especially when people got to try out the solution through little bite-sized chunks and they got to try it out one step at a time, they were also learning about all the nitty-gritties that came with it. And as a result, our brains are amazing organs, and they just were picking up this information. So this was, again, a key learning for us in the business, is really not trying to simplify and cut out processes, but rather give people access, or not access, or expose people to different steps of the process in a way that they were learning, building, gaining knowledge about that. And once they felt more comfortable with it, then exposing them to the next steps in the process. And then the last one is this idea that a solution needs to look different, or it needs to differentiate. And I think that's something that we find, especially in this digital era, is that people want to differentiate, and they need to differentiate because everybody is doing the same thing, or everybody's catching up to us. And ultimately, what we realized also is when designing or developing this platform, this analysis tool, is that actually we needed to keep it a bit more ordinary. So we needed to take learnings from the way people were using other digital solutions, whether it was Dropbox, Instagram, Pinterest, other video editing tools, Adobe, and we had to incorporate a lot of that. So people were more familiar with those tools, so that when they were using it, there was some inherent comprehension of what they were doing, and they quickly learned the steps. And that is something that was really useful for us in how people were engaging and interacting in these digital places, is how much intuitive knowledge it really exists because of the way people have engaged with other platforms. And by incorporating that into this new solution, you actually, or we got some more engagement from people once they started adopting these solutions. The last one that I'm going to talk to you about is when we had to take a digital solution to internal stakeholders or employees and people that are having to consume large amounts of data, or there's large amounts of data for them to consume. So very much to this question is there's a lot of data for people internally in these businesses to use, but ultimately they never actually end up using any of the data, and they make some suck guesses still. So how do we build something that equips these internal stakeholders to use the insights and actually make better decisions around the products they were developing? So we need to build a solution, or give people access to a data tool or data tools that is not overbearing, and especially people that don't always understand data. So how do you break it down for them and tell stories through that? And so really what we wanted to do through this is allow them to still make data-driven decision-making without it being overbearing. And the big learning out of this was we always have to keep the human in mind. And this is still a work in progress that I'm working on at the moment. But yes, we've incorporated AI, we've incorporated a lot of other solutions in the back end, but people don't always need to know that. People don't always need to know all the nitty-gritties of how the data has been put it there. They don't always need to know what's the sample sizes. Yeah, there are going to be people that's going to ask that, but that is often a matter of trust. And those are not the things that are going to create the trust. The parts that are going to create the trust is when people can actually intuitively see, wow, okay, this is a good insight. It makes sense to me. I can actually develop a product based on this. And that is the bigger challenge we have, is for them to feel comfortable that we're not breaking and making and adding more work to their load, because there's a lot of other processes they have to follow, but they are presented with information that's already incorporated into the work that they're doing. And as a result, they're making the decisions, again, almost by default, without them even knowing that they're having that they've got this data that's actually enabling them to make these decisions. So that is what I was meaning by having the human in mind, is that we've got to realize that, yes, we can either present and talk about the science and so on, and then they also going to want to come back to us and show that they have a lot of knowledge. But behind it, we actually also have to hide a little bit of the science and actually allow them to feel that this is part and parcel of their current processes. And the data just happens to be there. They can ask the questions, they can type in the questions, and the data's there, and the answers are there. And they're going to be trusting the processes because actually, or they're going to trust the data because I mean, as much as what we've become used to with ChatGPTs and so on, in terms of the way that it presents some information, people are familiar with some of those ways that they get to search and ask, and the answers are given to them in a very straightforward way without presenting too much information. But with that, having the human in mind, I want to tie all of these three areas together. And even though we dealt with I got to deal with different stakeholders, some of the principles were always the same. And one of the things, again, behind it is that there is a human, and we really need to empathize with those humans. And when we empathize, is we get to understand where they are at. It's not that we tend to impose what we think they should do, but it's also stepping into their shoes and really getting to understand what actually triggers them and how do they behave. And humans naturally, especially, I mean, if you talk about students and so on, can be quite lazy when it comes to doing anything, but they'll spend hours scrolling. And that's the thing, is that people often want to do things in a very effortless way, but it's got to be still stimulating. We don't want to create, and that's often where the ethical boundaries lie, is that we don't want to create something that is going to be mindless and sort of manipulative, but we want to create something that still feels like they gaining something out of it. So with that, you got to try it out, and you got to try out different approaches, and learning takes time. And there's, out of all of these solutions, it's never that we got it right all the time. It was always learning in motion, and a lot of patience. So sometimes we came up with hypotheses, we came up with outcomes that we thought, or ideas that we thought were going to be great outcomes, and we had to go back to the drawing board sometimes. So that is the process that often happens with this, is when we are trying to design and create solutions for people, we have to be patient with ourselves and just keep learning. The last point that I want to just have you take away from today is that the user experience is the key part that connects everything. And what that basically means is that the real transformation starts when we start including people in our processes, in the way that we are trying to learn, and not always think we have to know it all. It's sometimes worth us just putting it in front of people and seeing some stuff or seeing their response. And I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but this is not always intuitive in a corporate space. You would think that people that are doing UX would actually understand that they would still need to even test their own internal solutions with people or internal ideas with internal stakeholders. And often that doesn't come intuitively. And they understand the importance of putting it to the consumer in a testing way, but they didn't realize that they always had to also test it with their own stakeholders. And that's the challenge that we have, is that we've got to think of all of our stakeholders sometimes as users, whether we going up or down or sideways, wherever it is we're going. That's often the challenge we have, is that if we think of the way we interacting with people, we have to test our ideas and we have to keep it simple for them, but also empathize with them at where they're at. So those are the three key takeouts, if I could put it that way, that I would suggest you consider when looking at some digital transformation in any of your environments. And I'm really here to answer any questions or have any thoughts on what you guys have to say about what I've presented today.
Okay. Who's got a question? Oh, Dave. Go, Dave.
Hey, less of a question and more just a comment. I think you wrapped it up really nicely by just ending it off with UX again. I think it's yeah, very important, especially now, like a lot of people are talking about AI. Sorry, I see my camera's not working. Oh, and now I'm overexposed. Um, but yeah, I think it's with AI coming into the picture and a lot of these things, people are always talking about human in the loop, and what you're saying at the end is it's exactly that. It's not just about AI needing human in the loop, but it's just the simple fact that if we're designing for humans, then even if AI is not involved, we need humans. And yeah, I think you just put it really nicely, and that point kind of just like landed extra hard for me today, even though I'm like,
Thanks.
yeah, I teach students UX. So yeah, I'm definitely going to borrow that.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks for that. I think it's the same challenge I had when people had read all those behavioral science books, and they were like, "Yeah, but I mean, let's just build the solution based on that. Why do we have to go test it?" And that's often the challenge. Is when we tested it, we could actually show that sometimes in practice it doesn't work, and that's what AI does. It gives us the solutions, it gives us the answers, but in practice, sometimes it doesn't always work.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like the fun part about UX in a way is like, yeah, you get the unexpected results, and it's like, oh, why
Yes.
is that? Yeah, yeah.
Questions? More questions? I mean, I particularly enjoyed the way that you looped all of your three experiences and kind of conveyed the human element. I thought that was a very well constructed presentation, because sometimes there's not always the beginning, the end, and the connection. Sometimes there's the beginning, the end, and I don't know where this is going.
Thanks, Ted.
I've sat in a couple of those, and you're kind of like, well, how did we get from here to there? And
Yeah.
where's the middle? So I mean, I liked how you conveyed the different experiences from where you worked, from the financial house to the, I'm going to call it the eye tracking house, to
Yeah.
currently
The
work.
retail.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm trying to like put them, and the connection, of course, being humans, right? And the question, I guess this is not really a question, this is my reflection, is that if we start taking the humans out, which is what they're kind of proposing, how is this gonna work? Which is gonna be an interesting question, because like, well, okay, so then we get these awesome things that do everything for us. Is that not going to just kill sales? Because there's that tactile or the emotional connection which we're going to lose.
Yeah.
So, okay, so I need a fridge. Okay, cool. Order me a fridge. Fridge picks up. Well, I don't like the color. I don't like the style. I don't like the doors. I hate the handles. They feel terrible. The light has got a disco ball in. I'm thinking this is a good idea. It's just a proposal. I think disco balls and a fridge is a really good idea. This is always why they always laugh at me. But this is the kind of thing that I'm thinking, is that like, we don't know if they're starting to take the human element out of shopping, we're going to start seeing very interesting other issues, because UX is all about the person. AI is all about removal of it. So it's the not really antithesis, but almost the antithesis of this.
I mean, Ted, you touch on a really, and I mean, this is the earlier slide that I was saying is how do you bring the human into that? Because I mean, one of the things we learned at IKEA, or one of the insights that they have, is people went back to shops straight out during the pandemic or after the pandemic straight away because they wanted the human touch. They got tired of the digital environment because it felt too transactional. And I think understanding that at the basis, humans are social beings. Yeah, I mean, you can sit on that spectrum of introvert to extrovert, but people still need a human touch, or they still need to feel connected to someone or something. And in that way, I think it's a very important challenge for us, is that often sometimes UX can often exclude that, because we often want to simplify processes. We want to get people to the end result as quickly, or the end outcome as quickly as possible. But when we remember the human behind that, I think that's where we really get to understand that there's still something more to this. And that's why I don't think we ever will solve, I don't know if AI will ever solve that, but I don't know if we will ever solve that even in UX, is that when you're trying to design something, or when you're trying to create an experience, that can always be a challenge, is that sometimes you realize there's just something more people need.
Dave?
Yeah, sorry, I have a lot to say, I guess.
Mm.
But Just a question. So obvious, most of the times in industry, the reason why we rush for like a strategy that we don't involve humans is because we're dealing with a client that doesn't see the value of UX yet. And so we try to rush for quick results just to show them this is what we can do with very little time. And then they go, okay, great, keep doing that. Like, how do you stop that? And instead try to use approach of like, this is what we can do with very little time, but if you give us dedicated time and we can actually engage with real people, we could give so much more. Like, how do you help them swing in that way?
I mean, it's a really good challenge, and I don't want to say I've even figured it out, because it is. I mean, I deal with these internal stakeholders quite often. That's often the case, and I've just been dealing with one for the last 3 months, and even trying to get them to understand, how they need to be thinking about things out there. Is that they're coming in and saying, I mean, they haven't thought about the internal stakeholders at all, or the end users, and they saying, yeah, I think this is the solution everybody needs, and I want them to adopt this. And it's been a challenge to say to them that actually you can't just have that mindset, because you need to look at the bigger picture. But to convince them that their idea, and I think that's maybe emotional dissonance in itself, is that people get stuck on their own ideas and their own strategies and their own ways of thinking, that they actually forget that they still need to test it. They still need to challenge their thinking.
Right. Okay.
And maybe sorry, go carry on.
Something that I've been trying to instill in my students when it comes to this is getting them to realize that most of the times when people come up with an app, they reverse engineer the problem space. So they think they come up with a solution, and then they, it's always in the form of an app these days. And then they try to define a problem from the solution. And maybe something that can help with that is chat with the clients and be like, okay, let's work out what the problem space is, because maybe the app isn't the best solution, but you've highlighted an important problem space, and then design a real solution from there.
Yeah. I mean, you exactly that. And I think that's the challenge, is to get people to think that they need to define the problem first. And often a lot of people, and like I said to you, when we were dealing with this, one of the programs, or the rewards programs at the financial service provider I work for, they were very much about, yeah, well, we just want to have people more engaged and just build an app. And then they were like, yeah, but this is how that company's done it, so just copy that. And it's not that simple. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's because they've already got the end result in mind, and as opposed to actually, what is it that humans are actually, and I mean, it was a bit challenging. One of the things we try to do was to get the people in the organization to go, like we took them on a bit of an immersion where we took them into the homes, and we told them, go join them when they go to gym, go see what it's like for them when they're doing these things. And we organized some of these opportunities, and some people that actually went along, actually, it was the light bulbs actually switched on, and they were like, they were scared in the beginning, but they finally realized, wow, actually, this is what's happening. And they were like, yeah, but I can't think about my solution like that anymore. So it takes a while, but it's such a good point, like you said. It's to get people to define the problem from the start. I mean, theory and design thinking and everything just tells us we got to do that, but people are always wanting to reverse engineer, and I think that's been the bane of my existence as well. So it sounds like it's there always.
Okay, thank you.
More questions, comments? Am I going to pick on Derek? Derek? Oh, that looks like Dave.
No. Hey, Ted. No, I don't have any particular questions. Just really enjoyed Stephano's presentation. Thank you.
Thanks.
Dave, you should probably try and track down Derek and get him to talk for your students.
Okay. I'll it'd be
He
great
runs
if we can
a
exchange
UX
contacts.
agency.
1.1
How much can I sell Derek's contacts for? Anybody? 10 rand.
That's how
20 rand. Do we have 50 rand? Duffy. Yeah. Duffy's offering me 100. Go, Duffy.
Yeah, I'm not offering you 100. I just have an actual, I don't know, not so much like a direct question, but you mentioned something that kind of I can relate to pretty strongly, which is just like that in, you know, the thing about when people have access to the data they need in order to do the stuff, or yeah, the data or the info or whatever, to do the stuff that they want, but they don't know it, or it's poorly packaged, or it's too much or something. I think that's something that we struggle with a lot here, because there's just so much like info in the form of like different policies and rules and things you need to adhere to, and so we kind of end up asking and re-asking the same questions, you know, like in different places or the same places. So yeah, I mean, I know you sort of covered it, but do you mind elaborating just sort of on like your experience of this kind of problem in corporate settings, and how you can improve on this?
Yeah, I mean, great question. It's I know I speak from a corporate space, but I think it touches on in multiple verses where people have access to information and they don't always know how to use it, or if they're using it, they're quite selective what they use. So they'll find a stat that sort of fits their preconceived idea of what they were thinking about. So back to Dave's point, like they might have had this idea and they will wait for that 1% number that actually confirms what they're looking for. So often part of that is, and I think it has become in the storytelling or the packaging of the data. And I've been actually quite curious. So one of the things that we've done internally is we've got this great qualitative platform, very immersive platform. And what we want to try to do is tell more stories of the data as opposed to just presenting it in a very like dashboardy, typical PowerPoint presentation type of approach. So we're currently trying that out and seeing how people are engaging with it. What we're noticing is that there's some audiences that are actually really loving the stories that are coming out. So it's very narrative. It's not even in a formula, or it's not even in a percentage. And people are using some of that because I think they can relate to the stories, or they might have had those experiences and they can see it in that way. But to get people to use the data, it's often understanding where they're at and how much of the data they can actually use. So one thing